I never was a very good Christian. Believe me, I tried. When I was a teenager, I remember listening to Christian radio in countless 5-minute segments before switching back to sports talk or Radiohead. Millennials, ask your parents. I gave it my best effort to watch Christian movies like Fireproof and The Shack without rolling my eyes. And despite my best efforts, I failed, sometimes during the opening credits. Over the years, I probably purchased a dozen Christian devotional books, but I found them either too slick, God just wants to make you rich, or too sentimental, God just wants to hug your neck. I always feared something was wrong with me for not liking what other Christian kids liked. I used to pray about it. Why, God? Why do I find the goth kids more interesting than godly ones? Why can't I like Creed as much as Pearl Jam? Why would I rather watch Game of Thrones than Seventh Heaven? Since that time, I've learned 2 things about God and myself. First, if God is real, then He made me the way that I am, curious and rebellious, with a knack for sarcasm. Second, I know I'm not the only one who struggles with being a good Christian. So I wrote these devotionals for all those eye-rolling, sports talk listening, Game of Thrones loving part-time believers and full-time skeptics out there.
Today on Maybe God, host Eric Huffman and Story Houston member Sarah Bolton give the Maybe God community an exclusive first listen inside Eric's brand new book, 40 Days of Doubt, Devotions for the Skeptic. They'll talk about God and sex, why Christians believe Jesus is the only way to God, why we experience pain and loss, and other big issues holding many people back from faith in God. That's all coming up next.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Maybe God. This month marks 1 year since the launch of this podcast. What began as a casual coffee shop conversation between producers Julie and Brandon and me evolved into a journey that's been bigger than anything we imagined. It just goes to show how God's plans can be even more amazing and incredible than our own sometimes. As of today, we have thousands of listeners in 36 different countries across the world. Full disclosure, a year ago, when this podcast began, I was also working with Abingdon Press in Nashville, Tennessee, on my very first book manuscript. It started as a series of 40 emails that I wrote for the Story Houston, which is a church filled with skeptics and doubters like me. And in the emails, I tackled 40 questions that skeptics often ask about God and faith and religion. My lovely and supportive wife, Giovanna, submitted the devotionals to the publisher, and just like that, I had my first book deal. And that's when I found myself exploring 2 new worlds at the time, the podcasting world and the book world. As a result, many of my favorite guests on this podcast made it into the book, and many of the topics that were on my mind when I wrote the book, we dug into them even deeper on Maybe God. Just like this podcast, my book is meant to be an accessible way for people to address their doubts and seek deeper truth. So tomorrow, December the 4th, 2018, is a very big day for me. 40 Days of Doubt, Devotions for the Skeptic, will be released on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and on my website, erichuffman.org. And since we've been on this journey together over the past year, I wanted to start by giving Maybe God listeners the first listen to what's inside the book. So here goes. Day 1. Is existence reason enough to believe in God? Atheism makes sense. I may be a Christian now, but I still think people have some very good reasons for rejecting supernatural beliefs and embracing atheism. Just think about all the innocent people in the world who are Day 2. If God exists, what is He like? If you were born in ancient Greece, you wouldn't have believed in one God, but a pantheon of gods and goddesses. It would seem that your beliefs, whatever they are socially conditioned. Day 3. Why does God need to be worshipped? Let's face it, worship is weird. For many people, it brings to mind all kinds of bizarre imagery, from ancient rituals like human sacrifice to people literally drinking the Kool-Aid. As hard as we try to make modern worship less peculiar. Day 5. Why would God care what I have to say? I recently interviewed an atheist who used to be a pastor. When I asked him what led to his decision to leave Christianity, he said, "I just kept praying for people, and nothing would happen." For me, it wasn't about... Day 11. Why should anyone trust the Bible? The Bible has 3 serious credibility issues. Day 21. What if Thomas Jefferson was right? Just about everyone agrees that Jesus was a remarkable man. His teachings are timeless. He inspired a movement that undeniably changed the world. Day 28. Why are Christians no fun? Confession time. I happen to think that sex is fun, whether or not you're making a baby. I laugh at raunchy stand-up comedy. I curse. Day 31. Why would God care who I sleep with? One thing that's always bothered me about Christians is how judgy we can be about sex. Joining me today in the Maybe God podcast studio is Saras Bolton. Sarah is an avid podcast listener, a member of the Story Houston, and she's one of the many people in our congregation who inspired me to write the book. Sarah is a really good friend, and I'm so glad she's here. Hello, Sarah.
Hey, Eric.
How you doing?
I am doing well.
Good. So, Sarah, how long, for our listeners' sake, have you called yourself a Christian?
About 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
So I've known you almost 4 years.
Yeah.
But you were, and we've talked about this, you were raised in Bible Belt culture.
I was, yes.
So you knew of church.
Yes, absolutely. I've lived in small towns most of my life. And so that just, comes with the territory that churches are a big part of what shapes the worldviews of people in small towns.
Right.
Yeah.
And so why didn't you get more involved?
I mean, I think as a child, it has to do with your parents, right? They take you there or they don't. But as I got older and started to make my own choices about whether or not to attend, I didn't because I didn't feel comfortable attending. I was a bad girl.
Yeah,
I was a bad girl.
You were a bad girl, so you didn't feel like they wanted you there, or you would feel judged, maybe.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely did not feel welcome in the church.
Was it something that someone specifically said to you? Like, have you seen that movie Saved?
No.
Saved is a movie that's kind of a caricature of Bible Belt Christianity. It's like a inner circle Christian clique.
Okay.
That Mandy Moore is the lead character, and she's very judgmental and just so hypocritical and hateful. She literally throws the Bible at a person and says,
I am filled with Christ's love. God, you are just jealous of my success in the Lord. This is not a weapon.
The types of people who went to church and were very involved in church were also the same people that said pretty horrible things about me. And so I just equated the church to a place that judged, and henceforth a place where I was not welcome.
Yeah. Did you know enough about the Bible to know that they were wrong for judging you?
I knew nothing about the Bible. Well, when I became a believer and really started to study the Bible, it just completely flipped the script on everything I thought I knew about faith. And that's what's kept me around.
Yeah.
Because once I started to learn what I know today, I'm like, first of all, how did I ever survive without this?
Right.
And second of all, if everyone just had the chance to know the truth, what a better place the world could be. But unfortunately, there are a lot of painful untruths. There's a lot of hateful rhetoric. I think whenever you hear the word evangelical Christian, that's not usually positive.
No, that doesn't poll well.
No, and that makes me sad.
Yeah, same. So some of the questions you're raising and some of the things you ran into when you got back to church are the reasons why I wrote 40 Days of Doubt.
Well, look, first of all, I'll just be honest. When I got the book and I flipped open the table of contents, the first place I went was to the sex chapter. I'm just going to be real honest about that.
I bet you're not alone.
But actually, and then I went back to the beginning and started at day one. And really what hit home for me, what really resonated with me was on day 6.
So the entry about why choosing Christianity over other religions, which is a very touchy subject to get into because we don't like to think of it that way.
Sure.
So I tried to address it as honestly as I could in the book. Would you mind reading some of that chapter?
Yeah, for sure. Day 6. Why choose Christianity over all other religions? Sometimes I wonder why anyone with any knowledge of human civilizations would ever subject himself to a single closed religious system. What makes one religion right and all the others wrong? If you've ever wondered the same, I think you're in good company, because Jesus also spent time deconstructing organized religion. He criticized preachers for praying long, elaborate prayers, condemned religious elites for using the Bible to manipulate ordinary folks, hated the hypocrisy of corrupt priests, despised the assumptions made by religious leaders about who will be in heaven and who is deserving of hell. Jesus was determined to put religion in its place by setting the record straight about the Bible. The Bible is not just another religious book. It holds some major distinctions that deserve genuine consideration. Obviously, there's plenty of religion in the Bible, but within the text, there is also a clear and distinct movement towards something called gospel. And gospel is not religion. Whereas religion is essentially a collective bargaining agreement with God. If we're good to him, he'll be good to us. Gospel is essentially a free gift. God is already satisfied with us, so in response to his great love, we want to satisfy him all the more. Whatever ill will you might feel toward organized religion, Jesus felt it even more. If religious people have judged or punished you in some way, I promise you, they judged and punished Jesus even more. I believe he endured the scrutiny and shame of religious judgment to tear the veil off of religion and show the world once and for all the true face of God. The gods of religion say, "My love is based on your devotion," but the one true God says, regardless of your devotion or your lack of devotion, I love you the same. How radical is the love of God? He loves Osama bin Laden and Mother Teresa the same. He loves Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump the same. He loves the Beatles and Nickelback the same. He even loves cats as much as dogs. And if that doesn't prove the extravagance of God's love, I don't know what will. How can such great love exist? Why isn't love reserved only for the lovable? Because God is not merely religious. He is pro-gospel. Jesus would never coerce you to submit to his religion so you can be accepted into heaven instead of hell one day. He simply invites you to follow him because in his eyes, you're already accepted today. Oh, it's so good. This that I just read, this is exactly what motivates me today to be in this new crazy place with God. He's called me into grad school and I'm starting the process to become a local pastor. Are you flipping kidding me?
Thanks for censoring that. I can totally see it now. I can't say that I could have seen it, 3 years ago when we were just getting to know each other.
Yeah.
But now it makes all the sense in the world. And that's just a testament to how grace works.
Yeah.
In a religious system, you would have had to spend years working off what you had done before or, getting all the knowledge just right before you're allowed to ascend the ranks. And that's just not how grace works. And Jesus tried to tell us. This is not us making it up. Jesus tried to tell his own disciples, stop competing for first place here because the first will be last and last will be first because grace represents an upside down kingdom, And so the fact that Jesus has called you into ministry is no surprise to anybody that understands grace over religion.
Yeah.
But man, it's such a hard mold to break out of because everybody assumes Christianity is just another religion.
Sure.
And when you mess up, I see people just peeling off from church altogether because they don't feel like they should go anymore.
Yeah.
Because they screwed up.
Yeah.
When you screw up is exactly when you should go.
Yeah.
That's the point you need God the most because this is about grace and not judgment. Another thing people assume about us as Christians is that we see ourselves as this exclusive club and we think we know exactly who belongs and who doesn't and what that means for eternity. We know exactly who's going to go to heaven and we know exactly then who's not. And we're the lucky ones in here.
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote in Day 7. Day 7 is a chapter called Why Do Christians Believe Jesus is the Only Way to God? That chapter reminds me of our Maybe God episode with John Burke about heaven and hell and the near-death experiences episode. And John's a pastor in Austin who was a skeptic, and he was working as an engineer in his 20s until he started studying more closely near-death experiences. And John became convinced that God and Jesus are legit. Do you remember those?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I kind of had reached this place of kind of borderline legalism. And listening to those two podcasts really began to reshape my own theology. And it radically kind of shifted things for me.
Right.
Especially the story about the atheist who had the near-death experience and
Oh, yeah.
met Jesus.
I'm lying there and I heard a voice which kind of sounded like my voice, but it came out of my chest, not out of my mouth. And it said, pray to God. And I thought, I don't believe in God. And the voice said, pray to God. And I thought, I don't know how to pray. I don't pray. The voice said, pray to God. And I thought, when I was a little boy, went to Sunday school, they taught us some prayers. I don't remember any of them. And finally I come upon, this is it. The Lord is my shepherd. So I gave it a try. And when I did that, the people around me were saying me in incredibly vulgar, obscene language. There's no God, nobody can hear you, and you better stop it because we're going to make it much worse for you now if you don't stop. Along with that, I noticed that any mention of God was so repellent that they kept backing away, and that their voices were getting more and more distant. And so that encouraged me to keep throwing God stuff at them. Eventually, I found that I was the only sound that I could hear anymore. So I started thinking about my life, and I came to the conclusion that I had lived a crummy life, a selfish life, and that I had gone down the sewer pipe of the universe into the cesspool, and the people that attacked me were people just like me who had lived just more or less for themselves, and that they had nothing to do down there in this place of nothingness, except trying to dominate each other. And as I sank into the horrible prospect that this was it for me forever, my mind recalled being a little boy in Sunday school singing Jesus Loves Me, and more importantly than the recollection of that, a vivid recollection of that, was I felt what I'd felt as a little boy, that there was this great guy, this wonderful superhero guy named Jesus who really loved me. I desperately wanted that to be true. And so I called out, Jesus, please save me. And with that, a light appeared in the darkness and came over me. And for the first time I saw myself, and I was gore. I was looked like roadkill. And he reached his hands and arms out of this brilliant white light down to me and touched me, and all of the gore kind of just drifted away as if it were dust, and I was restored to wholeness. And when he touched me and was healing me, I was filled with his love, which is indescribably great. And his hands went behind my back, and he picked me up and held me very firmly up against his chest. And I put my arms around him and held on to him and cried of joy. And he carried me up out of that place.
I love the idea of Jesus just meeting us where we're at.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, he met Jesus on the other side.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But I mean, how do you explain someone having a second chance at life and just radically transforming? You know, that doesn't happen because of like a fluky dream. You know, this is real. It's real.
Oh, his whole life changed fundamentally, relationships and everything, because of that experience he had with Jesus.
Yeah.
After death.
Exactly.
Which was the issue, I think, because you mentioned legalism being a part of your walk at that point. And I think what happens when we start giving in to legalism, which, if that confuses any listeners, that's just this idea of, if I do this, then God will give me this. Oftentimes we tie that entirely to our behavior in this life. And so when we die, game over. Yeah. And whatever your score is at the end of the game, that's where you land, right?
Is what it is, yeah.
And this episode with John Burke called all that into question and more, but that was a big one for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, that podcast just really opened my eyes to the vastness of God.
Yeah, me too. Oh, I was in that interview.
Yeah, I can't imagine how powerful. My mind
was just blown, and my mouth was wide open the whole time. I was just amazed. I'd never heard a pastor talk this way. I've only heard a few people in my life talk the way you talk, and they were all high.
Thank you.
Has anybody ever said that to you before? I think there's something here, though. I think there's something universally true about this, and I mean high in the best possible way. Like you're seeing a different reality. You've seen a different dimension, and it's so much better.
Well, I would agree with that in that I do think, I've never had one of these experiences, but I've talked to so many people now.
You've experienced it by proxies.
I feel like I have somewhat. And so I get excited about it because, and that's why I finally wrote it. I wrote it knowing, okay, I'm going to take a lot of, I won't say the word for this.
You can. You wouldn't be the first.
But I think God wants people to know how real heaven is and how real the life to come is, and that the whole reason there is pain and suffering and evil in this life is because we've gone our own way, not God's way. And we are feeling what it's like to have God not rule. God doesn't rule. He only rules in the hearts of those who are wanting him to rule. And so heaven is the place where only those who want him to rule would even be happy there.
Right.
God will let anybody in. Anybody.
One thing I've noticed is most of the flack you're catching about this book isn't from neuroscientists or medical professionals. It's mostly from Christian types, Christian leaders. And there just seems to be a lot of fear-based reactions to the stuff you're bringing to the surface. And I understand it, but I think I understand it too well because I was raised in a fear-based kind of Christianity where I think what the aim is to keep all revelation of God, all knowledge of God, confined to the four walls of a church. Right? So when stuff like this starts happening, we're saying that non-Christians go and see Jesus and like all this, and Christians don't. It gets really scary really fast for institutional Christians.
But I think it's because it's back to what we were talking about doubt and questions. It's because people don't ask questions enough and they don't wrestle with their faith enough.
Yeah.
I mean, why should Christians be surprised that everybody would see Jesus when Revelation 1:7 tells us that? All will see him, even those who pierced him.
It messes with those core beliefs we talked about.
It messes with a certain Phariseeism, which says, I'm special, God likes me more than them. You would never say that, but it acts that way. Like God somehow doesn't want anything to do with them until they become like me. I mean, that kind of attitude is actually what got Jesus crucified in the name of God, by the way.
Right.
They were trying to protect God's reputation, supposedly. Now, reality is they were trying to protect their own power and control.
That's right. We were also, at some point in the interview, talking about people who have had very hard lives. Mm-hmm. And I asked him if he thinks God grades on a curve. And he said without hesitation, yes. God grades on a curve. And I'd never thought about it that way before. But what he meant is so clear in Scripture. What he meant is that God takes into account the ways in which the deck has been stacked against people.
Yeah.
And God expects more from people who basically have been given more.
Sure.
And that's the most scriptural thing you can say, right? Those to whom much is given, much is expected.
But think about it this way as a parent, right? Like when your baby does something or your toddler does something,
right?
You don't expect as much of them as you would your elementary school age child or your junior high age child because they know better, right?
Yes. And we say that all the time in the church, but I think sometimes what comes across is we don't really think God grades on a curve. We think God judges everyone based on the same sort of metric, which is have you accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, period, in this life, before you die, repented of your sin, and all of that. And what John seemed to say, which just blew my mind, is that God is infinitely more understanding and merciful than we are and our religious constructs could ever be. So, Sarah, we talked about your biggest stumbling blocks coming to faith and to church, being other Christians and feeling judged. For me, that was never the case. I was always Well, frankly, I was the other Christian. I was the Christian judging you.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. And, as what I was raised to do. And so it's all I knew. And, we thought that was right. We thought that being a good Christian meant behaving well.
Sure.
And people that didn't behave well weren't Christians or weren't good
yeah.
ones. And so the stumbling block for me wasn't Christians. It was really anti-Christians and people that levied devastating critiques of the Christian worldview in college classrooms. So after spending 18 years of my life surrounded by Christians in a very thick bubble in my Bible Belt world, I was off to college and I met the one man, Professor Otto, who I've talked about, who, with his own intellect, really, and his approach in the classroom, derailed my faith.
Yeah.
And here's what I wrote about Dr. Otto in the book. Day 23. Isn't Christianity anti-intellectual? Theoretical physicist and militant atheist Dr. Lawrence Krauss, author of the article All Scientists Should Be Militant Atheists, was asked during a public debate whether there's anything that could ever make him believe in God. He said yes, any empirical evidence whatsoever, because there is none. That reminds me of the day that I decided to leave Christianity. It was my junior year of college, and my religion professor, whose anti-Christian bent was almost as vitriolic and condescending as Dr. Krauss's, strolled into class wearing a black t-shirt that read, Christianity, the belief that a cosmic Jewish zombie who was his own father can make you live forever in his cloud kingdom if you telepathically accept him as your master and symbolically devour his flesh so that he can remove an evil force from your soul, which is there because a rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. Makes perfect sense. Above the sound of my fellow students' laughter, the most brilliant intellectual I had ever known proceeded to verbally eviscerate my most basic Christian beliefs. I left Christianity behind that day because I didn't want to anchor my life to something so foolish anymore. I wanted to be an intellectual, but I came to believe that you can't be academic and Christian. You have to choose between proven facts and blind faith. When I started writing that chapter, Sarah, I had no idea that our producer, Julie, would ask me a few months later to go to Shreveport, Louisiana and confront Dr. Otto.
Yeah.
For the first time in 17 years. We spent 2 episodes looking back at my past and how I went from Bible Belt religion and the certainty of that to the certainty of the secular humanist atheism that I claimed for a while, and then back to this relational faith in Jesus. You remember those?
I do, yeah.
Episodes?
Yeah. And, when I listened to those, a couple of things came up for me. The first one was that it made me incredibly grateful because you would not be the pastor you are today. And the story wouldn't exist had you not walked through this, existential crisis, if you will. And the second thing that came up for me was, man, the pain that he has just been living in for so long.
Yeah.
And that just made me really, really sad because
Me too.
I think there are a lot of people out there like him who develop a hardened heart.
Yeah. Here's a clip from the season 2, episode 1. I'm looking for David Otto.
I'm afraid he's dead.
I'm not surprised. The way that guy lives. How you doing, man?
Fine, how are you?
It's good to see you. How much time do you have?
As much as you want.
I started the interview by telling Dr. Otto how grateful I am for him. And it's true, I am. Even though I'm still bitter about some things and resentful, I'm also grateful for the ways that he's made me the man that I am today. And then we picked up right where we left off 17 years ago.
I remember a very young man who seemed to initially think he had all figured out in terms of faith. And you had what I'd call a pie crust faith, which it was something easily made but easily broken. And when the pieces started falling apart, I noticed you scrambling. And the scrambling is what I remember. You looking for a way to put it back together again.
Do you see that a lot with students?
Oh, yeah, all the time, yeah. It's an occupational hazard. It just happens. I mean, my area is the academic study of religion, and in particular, biblical studies. And if you're raised in church, you don't learn how to look at the Bible as from a scholastic point of view. If you never looked at the text that way, it's just mind-blowing because it is absurd. You know, I mean...
Say more. What do you mean about that?
Well, you think about a Jewish peasant over 2,000 years ago, pissed off some Romans, was crucified, and rose from the dead 3 days later, continued teaching, and eventually ascended to heaven. Well, that doesn't happen very often, and it's rather absurd to make that claim, unless you have something that you can rely upon to back it up.
I mean, it seems. I remember you describing Christians as ignorant on more than one occasion.
Yes, but not unredeemably. I think all people of all religions are called to have some degree of intellectual rigor.
Sure.
And
I agree.
And not to have intellectual rigor is in many ways to renege on your responsibilities as a believer.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that churches in particular must do a better job of introducing intellectual reasoning for believing in the stuff we believe. I want to push a little further on this because I think there was some anger then. I don't know if it's still there, but there was some legitimate anger in you about organized Christianity that really manifested itself at times in your teaching.
Yes. As an openly gay man, I have been used by the church when it was convenient by them, and then dismissed and belittled by the church when I wasn't of use. And I just got to a point where that type of ecclesiastical abuse was not acceptable.
So I mean, it would be impossible for you to keep that out of your teaching, out of your classroom in its entirety, like
unless I didn't want to be authentic,
right?
Of course.
And there it was, the missing link in my understanding of Dr. Otto's anger toward Christianity. By his own account, he felt used and judged by the church. Man, I so wanted to go toe-to-toe with him that day and just have it out. I got there and I didn't know about Parkinson's, which had set in. I think in the episode I said he had signs of Parkinson's, but it turns out he actually does have Parkinson's. And I didn't know all that he had been through. I hadn't talked to him in 17 years.
Sure.
It was very hard to be anything but merciful. I felt this overwhelming desire for him to know that he's loved.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah.
he's made mistakes, in my view, and led people astray. And
Yeah, but the beauty of the promises, God's promises, is that he uses everything, right?
Right. He
For the
really
good of
does.
those who love him. And I believe that. So, you know, even if someone does walk away or they think about things differently, you know, God's able to use that too.
Yeah. That season of my life taught me to see through the religious facade of church.
Yeah.
And you don't lose that when you come to faith in Christ.
Sure.
You bring that with you. And I'm
Yeah.
glad, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because now I'm all in with Jesus, but I still see through the facade of religion and church.
So for me, I think I just want people to know God doesn't have the same hang-ups that Christians do.
Yeah.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm? Think about that. This is a God of pleasure, and I think in the church, we find that hard to embrace. You know, I'm writing at the moment on the senses, and I been thinking about taste buds. God didn't have to give us taste buds, but he wants us to feel the pleasure, to feel the delight of the different flavors that we have. So what do our taste buds say about God? You know, this is not some bound up, crazy kind of moralistic sort of being. This is a God that can have a lot of fun.
Right.
I think the church, we've misrepresented, haven't we, throughout history, misrepresented our God.
And in this particular moment of the church's history, the LGBT community seems to be on the forefront of everyone's minds in churches. Like, who are we going to be to our LGBT communities? So I would just kind of pose the same question to you. What do you wish LGBT people and communities knew about God that maybe they're not hearing from churches?
Oh dear, that's a big one, isn't it? First of all, I mean, the obvious thing for me to say, and I don't just say it, but I believe it, God is a God of all. He created humans in all different shapes and sizes and colours and expressions, and, God's table is open to all. I mean, that's really important to me. God has a big table and everyone is invited.
One of my favorite episodes of the Maybe God podcast has been when you interviewed Deb Hirsch, the author of Redeeming Sex.
Yeah.
What an amazing lady.
She is incredible. Did you read the chapters in the book where her name comes up, where we talked about sex and sexuality?
Yeah. Day 32, what really struck me about on this topic is because within the Christian faith, the LGBTQIA++ community is, that is a hot topic right now. It's like splitting up churches.
Oh, denominations. And everything. Yeah.
It's crazy, which I think is exactly what the enemy loves. He's having a field day with this.
Yeah.
But this really jumped out at me. There's a part in the book where you write, maybe sex isn't really what any of us want. Maybe what we want is love. Maybe what we really want is God. Nevertheless, it's a truism that we become like what that we worship. And it's possible we worshiped sex for so long that we've come to see sexual appetite and identity, which used to be a small part of who we are, as our very essence. I think we're focusing on the wrong things here.
Right.
And
you think just Christians, or you think the whole world? Or?
The whole world.
Yeah,
the whole world. Christians too. Christians, because it's like, I think we look at sex as like this bad thing with all of these terrible consequences. And then the whole world, because sex is a complete idol.
One of the most helpful things actually that I heard Deb say wasn't in our interview. It was the first time I met her at a conference that I saw her speak. And one of the first things out of her mouth was, when someone comes out to you, they have told you very little about themselves. And so when someone tells you their sexual orientation, you know about them maybe 2% of who they really are.
Yeah.
There's much, much, much more to learn about them.
Yeah.
And I think it's a reflection of our bending the knee to sex as an idol.
Absolutely, on both sides of the fence. So,
Right.
Back to like for me feeling judged as, a high school kid, I was sexually active, promiscuous even.
Right.
And looking back on that, I can see that it was about me being just lost and looking for love.
Right.
And I was looking for the love of God, but I didn't realize that's what I was looking for.
Sure.
And so I found this really sort of like cheap substitute for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really why our society today is so sexually charged. We are all built with this innate desire. We're designed to seek the love of God. And if we're not seeking it from God, we're going to seek it from somewhere.
Right. All right. Sarah, let's talk about the episode of Maybe God that I like to talk about the least. It's the episode that had everybody sobbing and in tears. It's our most listened to and downloaded episode, but I have not gone back to listen to it at all.
Yeah.
I've heard clips here and there. I can't listen to it all the way through.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I'm not sure we did the best job offering people hope at the end of that episode, because we were in a place of dark shell shock.
We were still grieving.
Yeah, we were still grieving.
Yeah.
So I guess you know which episode I'm talking about.
Yeah. About Casey.
Yeah. Did God save the catfish? And we recorded that just a few weeks after losing our brother and our close friend, our larger in life bear of a man, father of 5, Casey Smith. His wife, Dorian, and I were still both deeply in grief at the time, which I think is what made that interview so real. I think that's why it resonated with so many people the way that it did.
Casey had a unique ability to be like, chill out, Dorian. It's never as bad as it seems. We've got this.
Yeah.
God's got this. And I miss that hope that he always had. Hope against hope. Like hope, like a puppy dog is hopeful because they're kind of dumb and they don't know better, right? He had this eternal hope and optimism that it was just going to be okay because he was Casey Smith.
Mm-hmm. So toward the end there, we exchanged a couple text messages about like how and why God. Like I remember one text from you in particular where you were like, why would God let me know someone so amazing and wonderful and perfect for me only to take him away from me? If this was his plan, then why? Have you had a chance at all yet to reflect on that and to deal with those questions?
No and yes. I find that I have more questions than answers even now. I was asking why, and now I feel like my questions are more centered on what's next.
You continue coming to church.
I had to, because it's such a spiritual wasteland to be with the person that you believed with. We prayed together. We read the Bible together. We talked about God together, and then now he's gone. And I start to wonder, I think kind of the place I'm at now is I feel like our friends are really moving on from the why and the how, and they've embraced that he's gone, but I'm still not quite there yet. And I feel like maybe they're wondering why and how I still believe in a God that took my best friend. And I worry about that in some ways. Am I stupid?
Everyone who looks at this from the outside would say, from your Facebook page, God didn't save the catfish.
Right. God didn't save the catfish. So why do you keep believing? And what's interesting to me, and the thing I'm praying about to the God that I'm not sure listens to my prayers, is that I can keep clinging to the rod and the staff, and that I will be led to a place where this doesn't feel impossible. I don't know how I'm going to walk out of here today. Some days I don't know how I'm going to feed my kids in 10 years, or how they're going to go to college, or how God might disappoint me next. So I just keep praying that I can cling, and that even if people think I'm dumb for continuing to serve and believe in a God that has failed me, Casey used to say all the time, no matter what happens to me, God's son hung on a cross, nailed in front of his mother, betrayed by his best friends. No matter what happens to me, it won't be that bad. And that's my hope right now. Mm-hmm. That no matter how bad this is, it's not that. And that God that loved his son and let it happen, he can love me through trial. And he can love me through pain.
We always like to leave our listeners asking questions. At the end of every episode, we don't feel like it's our role to clean everything up and to spoon feed answers, and I don't think the people that we're aiming for would want us to do that anyway. But this one episode about catfish, I think, deserves something more. I'd like to offer our listeners a little bit of perspective on it all, maybe a little bit of hope. And it's from a chapter in the book, and the chapter is called, Will God Really Never Give You More Than You Can Handle? When Christians say things like, God will never give you more than you can handle, it feels condescending and dismissive to those who have been utterly broken by the hand they've been dealt. There are two things to remember about that phrase. First, it's taken out of context. God will never give you more than you can handle is rooted in 1 Corinthians 10:13, where Paul is clearly talking about temptation and sin, not pain and loss. Second, we need to deal with the assumption that God gives us everything that comes our way. Some Christians talk as if everything that happens in the world must be God's will, but not even Jesus believed that. That's why he taught us to pray for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. If it was a given, we wouldn't need to pray for it. Some things that happen to people are not the will of God. Some things that have happened to you were not the will of God. And sometimes it's way more than we can handle. God's promise isn't to be the almighty helicopter parent who protects you from every awful thing. Instead, when it all falls apart, God comes near to you. Psalm 34:18 says the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. He doesn't wait for you to get it together. He doesn't wait for you to get back in church. He finds you in the darkest places to help show you the way out. God grows your character. Romans 5:3-4 says, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope." God will take something that wasn't His will for your life and turn it around for good. God restores you. 1 Peter 5:10 says, "The God of all grace, who called you to His eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will Himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." As you heal, God will strengthen and establish you, giving you the courage to shed the victim mentality that often keeps people in their darkness. You may not believe it now, but there will soon be a time when you'll look back on your worst day and see how God was with you all along. So Sarah, your story is very different from Dorian's, obviously, but you're a single mother who's dealt with a lot of pain
Yeah.
and uncertainty in your life.
Yeah.
And you're one of the best examples I can think of to speak to how God restores through pain.
Thank you, I guess.
Well,
No.
I
yeah,
mean,
it's true.
I've had a very easy life compared to most people that I talk to. And I hear you telling your stories, and it's a wonder. It's a wonder to me that you're sitting here today.
Yeah. My parents pretty much hooked up. My mom got pregnant at 16. I was very close to being aborted, but instead my parents got married. Back to that Catholic thing, right? And they were divorced by the time I was 6 months old. So I never knew my parents together. And then my mom was in, a series of relationships, a lot of them unhealthy, and saw a lot of domestic abuse growing up. And that sort of shaped what I thought relationships looked like. And at age 11, I started to drink and smoke marijuana. By age 12, I was sexually active, using cocaine by 13. I mean, so, there were a lot of traumatic things that happened early on. And, but somehow through all of that, I was a straight A student and eventually student council president. So everyone was like, "Oh, well, she's great. She's good. Look at her life." And I went to college and, same thing, had a full ride, but got arrested 3 years. And same thing. It's like, oh, well, she must not be doing that bad because she's kept her scholarships. Good job. Way to go. And then I get out of college and boom, find out I'm pregnant with this guy that I dated on and off who was a lot like me, an engineer student, but a drug dealer. And then we got married and tried to make it work. And, guess what? It didn't. I don't think that should come as a shock to anyone. And, just trauma after trauma after trauma, losing jobs, losing a marriage, almost losing custody of my child. And that kind of being the final wake-up call for me, which led me to sobriety, which led me to the church, which led me to sitting here in front of you today, being interviewed on your podcast. So yeah, that was a lot in a short period of time. But here's the cool thing about God, all of those things, that none of that was in vain. He's used all of that to equip me today to be able to help other people that are perhaps struggling with similar situations. He's given me a voice. And so I think that God's like, "Hey, baby girl." In my mind, God calls me baby girl.
I like it.
Yeah. This is what I want you to do now, because it is crazy. It's radical.
Yeah.
The thought of pursuing higher education and
and people that would never think of opening up to someone like me in a one-on-one setting, would totally open up to you.
Yeah.
And find healing.
Yeah,
and
I hope
hope,
so. I hope so.
Because it's so easy when you go through stuff, I think, to turn cynical about it. And you've decided not to. It's a choice.
Yeah.
And I think you credit God for that, and I'm all about it. I like it, but it's also
it's the only thing that makes sense.
Right.
God is the only thing that makes sense. What I know from my life, from 31 years of living a certain way, and then it all literally changing overnight, is that those changes did not come from me. No, granted, I put forth the effort, I put in the work.
Right.
Faith without works is dead, right?
That's right.
But that radical shift, that did not come from me.
Yeah.
And so I have to give God the glory because
it's the only way to make sense of it.
It's the only way.
Yeah.
It's the only way to make sense of it.
Right. So, Sarah, I want to end today by reading to you an excerpt from chapter 26 in the book, 40 Days of Doubt. Day 26 asks the question, why doesn't belief in God make your life easier? Jesus won't keep you from pain. In fact, sometimes following Jesus will lead you to feel more pain. But the difference Jesus makes is this: He always works in your pain to redeem it, to make something beautiful out of the mess. Jesus never promised to make your life easier. He promises to make your life matter. And I celebrate that when I hear you tell your story today, and every time I've heard you share any part of your story, that's exactly what I see happening to you. I see Jesus taking whatever you've been through, whatever broken pieces of glass there are on the floor, piecing it back together and making something beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful to Sarah for sharing her story, because for me, the most powerful proof of God's existence isn't found in any substantive arguments, but in stories like hers. I can't deny God like I once did. There are too many people in my life bearing witness to Him, including Sarah and countless others at the Story Houston. 40 Days of Doubt is by no means a perfect book, and I'm sure the Maybe God podcast hasn't resolved every single question you have about God. But if this book or this podcast help you somehow to find the courage to run toward your questions and your doubts instead of shying away from them, then I think we've achieved something. Because I believe that when we run toward the questions that matter, God meets us there. I love our Maybe God community, and I want to thank all of you for your support. You've been incredible this year. If you want more information about my book or any of the books that you've heard about from past Maybe God guests, please head to our brand new website, maybegodpod.com. That's maybegodpod.com. To end today's episode, here's the dedication that I wrote in my book about my wife, Giovanna. To the woman who never stops talking to God. You saw this book before I ever sat down to write it. You saw the man who wrote it before I knew he really existed. Every day with you is an adventure full of grace and wonder. Your determination, wit, and those big brown eyes set my heart ablaze. Now more than ever. I love you, Giovanna Elizabeth.